So hello and welcome to the Introduction to Postman for API Ops Professionals webinar. I actually received a little question about whether a few folks attending the webinar are or belong to the API Ops category. So I think we do realize that API Ops is a buzzword, but what I'd like to start with is something that Kin Lane, our chief API evangelist at Postman, had said about API Ops. So it's just an extension of DevOps, which are the little incremental things that we have to do throughout our day to get our job done. So setting the database, pushing code, CI/CD, running a test, it's all part of that. And it's what needs to be accomplished in the day. So if you play with APIs, if you deal with APIs on a daily basis, and if you're into DevOps, then probably this is a good place to be. And before we begin with the webinar, I'd actually like to gauge the audience. So can we have the poll? Awesome. So I'm not familiar with API Ops is 55%, which is the maximum. There's moderately familiar, which is a moderate amount. And there is, I do API Ops, but I'm new to Postman at 6%. And I use Postman every day for API Ops. That's lovely. That's 10%. So for the folks who are not familiar with API Ops, I think this is a good chance to just get familiar with a lot of tasks that could help. Moving on, I've spoken quite a bit, so let me go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Meenakshi Dhanani. I'm a developer advocate at Postman. That's my Twitter handle, so you can follow me. But as a developer advocate at Postman, I do a lot of outreach. We do live streams, webinars, conference talks to engage with Postman users and people from the community like you, so that we can get feedback to the product and influence the roadmap and get you better features. And Vu, would you like to go ahead with your introduction?
Thanks, Meena. Hey, I'm Nguyen from California. Really excited to be here today. I'm a solutions engineer here at Postman. Even before joining Postman, I had used Postman for about 5 years when Postman was just a Chrome extension app. So I'm really excited to be here again. I help a lot of companies become API first, and I help them just become more successful with APIs. So I love using APIs and I love playing with APIs. And I love talking about API ops too. So excited to have everyone today.
That's awesome. Thank you, Vu. So before we begin, I will just browse through a couple of the housekeeping items. All the attendees will be muted throughout the webinar, but you are free to chat on the Zoom chat. And if there are any questions while we're speaking through the webinar, and it will be useful to have them under the Q&A section. So make sure to use the chat to chat with folks, but to ask questions, if you can put it under the Q&A section. And a recording of this session will be shared with the attendees, and it will be also available on the Postman YouTube channel after the event. And we'd like you to stay back for a brief survey at the end of the event when we're done, so that we can get feedback for the webinar, so that we can incorporate all of that when we do the subsequent webinars. We're going to be using a collection on Postman, and for you to be able to follow along, it would be very easy if you have your Postman account and if you're logged into it. So that's that. And moving on, the agenda and what we're going to cover today is we'll talk about an introduction to Postman. So we're assuming that a few of y'all, or maybe most of y'all, are familiar with probably DevOps or CI/CD and API Ops concepts, but maybe new to Postman. So we're going to focus a bit on the introduction to Postman. And we'll get started with the collection that we're going to use throughout the webinar. We'll walk through it, and at the end, we'll leave you with certain resources so that you can look through them. And we'll have the last 5-10 minutes or so to cater to all of the questions under the Q&A section. Over to you, Wu. What's Postman? Tell us.
Thanks, Meena. So earlier, as I mentioned, Postman started off as a Chrome extension app about 6 years ago, and it's grown into a full API development lifecycle tool. So I use Postman every day just to better collaborate with my teammates, and I love testing APIs, designing APIs, and even building APIs just to make sure that it's working as expected. So we have over 15 million users, I think almost 16 million now. So a lot of folks every day who may not know what APIs are or who may use APIs every day. So it's a wide audience. Yeah, we definitely have a lot of cool features within Postman itself, especially within the API ops side. So today we'll be going over a lot of it. Excited for it. Okay. Next slide, Meena, please.
Yep. So I'll go over what we're going to cover through the webinar. We're going to be looking at a Postman collection that we're going to be using throughout the webinar, and we'd like for you to be able to access it and to try out certain requests as well through the webinar. And it's configured with different server environments and variables for that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get into how to use environments and different server environments in Postman. And the collection that we have is a workflow. It's an automated workflow, which is what we're going to dig into and talk about what a workflow is and how to create one in Postman. And then we'll move to integrating that workflow with your CI/CD pipeline. For the sake of this webinar, we've chosen a CI/CD tool as Jenkins, but you should be able to apply the learnings from this webinar to another tool which you use for your projects or in your team. Then we move to look at monitoring APIs and websites with Postman monitors. And we'll briefly touch upon deploying services and setting up alerting and other integrations. So let's get started. I'm going to share this link on the chat, but go ahead, and for all of those who are logged into their Postman account, you can go ahead on this link and create a fork of the collection to your own workspace. And I'm going to stop sharing, and Wu, it's over to you now with the collection. So.
Thanks, Meena. Okay, so I have my Postman screen opened up, and I'll go ahead and fork this collection. So I will fork it into my webinar personal workspace and fork the collection. Let's give it a second. My internet is kind of slow. Okay, sweet. So can you see my collection okay and my forked content? Okay. Let me minimize this over here by scrolling over just because I'm zoomed in a bit. Okay, so it might look a little bit different than yours just because I collapsed that part.
Wu, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. So if we can explain what it means by forking the collection.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. So what I just did was that I essentially created a clone of that collection from Meena's public workspace, but I'm still tied to the original source so that when you make updates, I'll be notified. And if I have any changes or any requests to like submit so that you can create a pull, I can create a pull request, you can be notified and we can push these changes and merge it together. So essentially it's a clone, but it's tied to the original source and you can still follow and make changes. Okay, so now that I have this opened up, Mina, what should I do?
Well, we could go ahead and give them a walkthrough about what this collection has, what it does.
Yeah. So this collection here is our own collection that we shared so that you can follow along too. So on this hand, let me expand this documentation here just to make it larger. On this page here, you can see all the documentation and instructions we made so that you can follow along, even clicking through this run and Postman button to fork the collection, as well as your environment environment file. So it looks like this collection had attached a staging environment, and I can see the details there once I click on this eyeball on the top right. And as I scroll down, I see a bunch of documentation and instructions. Thanks, Mina, for putting together good documentation. It's a really important part of APIs, and as well as some checklists and additional resources and images to help me understand what I'm going on. Ooh, I can also copy and paste some files so that's easier to access. Okay, so this is the main collection. So Mina, should I get started? Actually, I think I realized I have to submit my key real quick. So 1 second while I plug in the key to the collection I just put.
What do we mean when we say the key? Is it a secret?
Yes, a secret. So what I'm doing now is since we're using a public server, I had to make sure to authenticate myself with a proper key. Okay, so I have this collection open now. And Mina, should I start off with the first endpoint?
Yeah. Is it possible? Is it possible to show the authorization for this collection?
Mm-hmm. So I'll click over to collection here, and I'll show the authorization here.
Yep.
And we're using basic auth, correct? And then we have the username and the password that I had just pasted over that I didn't want to share, or the API key. Okay, Mina, so should I get started now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first collection, let me expand the documentation again, and let me just hide this real quick. I'll show it's called the Obtain Jenkins. Sorry, I expanded. I forgot the title. It's Obtain Jenkins Crumb. So I will go ahead and send it. But before I do that, actually, I just want to mention that I have a unique URL here that hits the Jenkins server, as well as the rest of the endpoint and some test scripts, headers, and params. So I'll go ahead and click send. Okay, cool. 200. That's good. So Mina, what should I do next?
What is the Jenkins Scrum do? I think it's required for the authorization of the APIs that are next, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we can go over and look at the requests, like what does the create build pipeline do and the create deploy to higher environment do?
Yeah, let me open this up. So, okay, let me expand this again. So we're looking at the second endpoint of this collection here, where we'll be making a post request to submit a build. So there's some text here and examples. So I'll go ahead and click send. Okay, cool, 200. So what I just did was submitted a build into my Jenkins environment. So let me open up Jenkins and refresh. Okay, cool. So I have the build here. This is correct, right, Meena?
Yep. I think can we, yeah, it's actually build hyphen and service. So
Oh, build hyphen
uh,
service.
so maybe right now we want to touch upon what the two curly braces mean. Like, what does it mean to have two curly braces?
Okay, yeah. So this is essentially a Postman variable that references um, some values that you had placed within Postman. So for example, you see Jenkins URL, we have a unique link where it hits the initial value here, which is the HTTP 13.56.something 8080. So this essentially makes it easier for you to remember, and you can place your keys and values here. And then, Mina, should I put something for the service value?
So what we can do is now that we have these requests right in the collection, uh, what would be useful is a lot of times, like in my past organization as well, sometimes we had a couple of microservices and we had to build up these pipelines manually. Like we would go to Jenkins, we do like click business and build out those pipelines. So what I was hoping for was, if we can, like, we have these requests already in the collection, but is there a way that you could probably share with us that I could run them all for multiple services?
Yeah. So yeah, so let me, how should I proceed? Should I go into the next endpoint?
Sure. So we could go into the next endpoint, or we could move to the Postman runner to see how we want to automate, or like we want to run all of these in a loop for the multiple services and the environment that we have.
Okay, good idea. So let me go ahead and click the collection folder, and then I can go ahead and run it so it runs the whole collection. So now I have the option to select which endpoints as well as iterations. Should I select a file, Mina?
Sure. What exactly will happen? Like what? Maybe we can select the file and see what happens or what the file does.
Yeah, let me go ahead and find my stage file. Okay, so I had a JSON file on my desktop to run against the variables placed inside these endpoints so that I can set it automatically. And this helps me in the long run if I wanted to run a lot of requests and variables without having to do it over and over manually. So now I can do it programmatically, as well as setting any iterations and delays.
Should we check the preview just to see if what
Yes,
values?
yes. Okay, so looks like this JSON file has iteration once, serves as quiz, and a GitHub URL with the build as true. Okay, so let's go run it.
Yep.
Okay, sweet. So it ran the 3 endpoints. Let's view the results. And cool, all of them ran successfully. So now should I head over to Jenkins to see what just happened?
Yes, we want to see the magic behind the runner, what it did.
Oh, there it is. Cool. So it looks like it made a couple of builds from Postman to Jenkins. So it was a deploy to staging quiz, right, Mina? Was it this the file?
Yep. So I think that's because we selected the staging environment. So it's gone ahead and done up a build pipeline, because I think we had build true in the data, like the JSON file. So it's created a build pipeline for us, and it's created a deploy to staging quiz pipeline. Do you want to click over on them and like check how it runs or how it looks, any one of them?
Yeah, so I had clicked the pipeline deploy stage. Should I go ahead and build now?
Yep.
Okay. It's, oh, oh, there it is. So it's building. Cool. So it looks like deployed to stage in 109 milliseconds.
That's awesome. And it's also because, yeah, maybe we want to look at the code to deploy, but probably after the webinar. So yeah, for the sake of saving time, it's not actually deploying to staging, but the idea is to be able to create the setup, the CI/CD setup for all of these pipelines. And I'd just like to add actually, so the Jenkins environment that we have and the Jenkins server, like the one that Wu is accessing, that's something that we're going to be using. In order to be able to use that, we need to get authorized to use it. So that's where the basic auth comes in, where we enter the username and the password. But that's not something that we're sharing with everybody because we're a bit worried if everybody starts to create pipelines, the service will crash. So what you could do is create a fork of this collection and follow along to see what each request does. And even if you get like, you may get a 401 because you're not authorized, but it would help get an idea of how the runner actually works. So that's what we're hoping. But the documentation should help even after the webinar be able to spin up the Jenkins and do the runner and offline as well. So.
Okay, nice. So let me head back to the dashboard where I can see the runs. So now that we made a build within Jenkins, what should we do next, Meena?
We actually deployed to staging, but I think we could speak a bit more about what the environments in Postman are, like the staging and the production environments and how it's getting used.
Yeah, good idea. So earlier when I had forked this collection here from the public workspace, I had also conveniently forked over the environment variable. So when you look in the top right-hand corner, you'll see that there's a drop-down list. If you had followed along, by default, it would show no environment. But if you select the drop-down list, you'll have staging, and you can also click the eyeball to peek over at the values. So earlier, as I mentioned, we have variables and values. And by default, it would always read the current value first. And the difference between current and initial is that current always stays locally and initial is synced and shared across your teammates and across the servers. So if I'm working on something sensitive and I don't want to share with my teammates or any other folks, or I have a public workspace with a key, I would put it in the current value just to keep it secure because it stores locally. And environments are really useful, especially when you're managing multiple profiles or different environments as well. Or I mean, like server environments. So for example, we had another environment where for production. So you can test against that specific server versus this staging one. And this helps make it so that you can run different tests on different profiles. And this helped me a lot when even before joining Postman, I had used environments just to make sure I can manage multiple customers and all the specific profiles. Okay, cool. So Meena, what should we do next now that we talked about environments and the collection and shown it in Jenkins?
Yeah, I was hoping so what we've done is we've used the runner, and the runner is something that anytime we want to spin up these pipelines for a couple of services in an environment, we can do so. But what we did, right, we selected an environment. So we selected staging, and then when we ran it, each of the pipelines had deployed to staging-quiz. So do we want to just reiterate the bit about like we have the variables in the environment, but how do we get the value of these variables in the request that we're running?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, you use the data file just to run against the specific values. So you had saved one. I think you have the example in the documentation itself so that you can just, let me expand this here, where you can just copy and paste this value here and save it as a data.json file. So I can run against it, and it knows to read that, hey, service variable equals to quiz value, as well as GitHub URL variable equals to this link here as a variable, so as a value.
So the way that I understand it, the collection used a couple of variables. So one place that it got its variables from is the data file that we uploaded, and the other place is the environment that we selected, correct?
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. So where we've done it with the runner, should I go ahead and cover the other ways to automate runs for Postman collections?
Yeah, please do. Let me stop sharing.
Yep. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Vu, can you confirm that my screen is?
Yeah, I can see Postman and Introduction API Ops collection and documentation.
Okay. So I'm just going to follow the sequence that is here in the documentation, and one that folks, when they fork the collection, can follow offline as well. So we did it with the runner. We were able to spin up certain pipelines in Jenkins using the Jenkins APIs. And to run the workflow, the first thing that we did is use the collection runner that Wu showed us, and we used a data file. And right now, this just had one service, but it could have multiple such objects for run, like to be run with more services for a particular environment. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and see how else we can automate the run. And before we do that, actually, one reason why I think maybe Wu and I would be referring to the collection as a workflow is because there is a certain goal to this collection. One way to use a collection is to go over to browse the collection, to look at the requests and to send the requests and like to get some response and do something. The other one is that the entire collection is run as a workflow, which is what we're trying to do through this collection. So this, yeah, the folder contains requests that make up a workflow, and a workflow is helpful if we want to achieve a particular goal. And in this case, our goal is to be able to spin up the Jenkins pipelines. And that's why we keep referring to the collection as a workflow, because we're not thinking of it in terms of individual requests, but we're thinking in terms of automation. We're thinking if there is a flow or series of requests which we can automate and run in an automated fashion. So we've used the collection runner to do that. And now another option that we could do that is, so for the runner, each time you may have to come to your Postman workspace and you will have to select the collection, hit on run and then run the collection. And that's a one-time thing. But if there is, like, for example, if this workflow is something that you want to integrate in your pipeline, then we can do that with the command line tool, which is called as Nguyen. So what Nguyen does is it basically runs collections against environments. And if you have the Nguyen utility, that's a node package. If we have it installed, we can just run the collection with Nguyen run, the collection file and the environment. So what I'm going to do is we have this collection right here. And I have, so this is the public workspace. What I've done, like everyone, is forked the collection for the webinar into my own personal workspace. And like it says in the Nguyen command here, I'm going to scroll over to the Nguyen command. Yeah, we need the Postman collection JSON file and the environment JSON file. So one way to get that is, and like one of the most common usages of it is, if I click on the three dots and I click on export, I will be able to download the collection file. And this is something that I can use in the command. So let's say I have downloaded the collection and the environment files. And for environment as well, I think we can go over to an environment, click the three dots and have an export option here as well. So that's how I have both of these files exported. And yeah, so now that we want to integrate it into our CI/CD pipelines, what we'll need to do is go over to Jenkins. And if, like, in the interest of time, I have actually taken the liberty to create the pipeline. So I'll go over to the pipeline, but let's, and it's already run. It's already run because, why? Because of because Woo ran it earlier. So Woo ran it for build quiz and deploy to staging and all of these. So it's already run. I'll just clean these up so that we can see what Nguyen does. And then again, you do realize what an effort it is to manually be cleaning these up, like each individual pipeline, clicking and cleaning it up. So it is definitely useful again. And this could be like a little homework for everybody after the webinar to go and check out the delete API of Jenkins and to be able to clean up your entire environment. So we go over to the CI/CD pipeline, which I've already set up, and I've not added anything except I've added the description here. And in order to integrate Nguyen and for it to be able to run each time I trigger the pipeline, what I'm doing is it's a Node package. So we need Node installed on the agent that runs this build. In Jenkins, how you can do it is Jenkins has Node.js plugins. So that's what I'm doing. And one way, if I had the files locally on my Jenkins server, would be to refer to those .json files like we see here. So I exported them and I use them. The only catch with the ones that you export is, since it's an exported copy, it's detached from the original collection. So if I were to make any changes to any of these collections and I was to trigger the pipeline, the changes wouldn't reflect in the pipeline because that's an exported file. But with the Postman API, I'll be able to refer directly to the collection and to the, let me scroll ahead. Yeah. So with the Postman API, it says api.get.postman and the collection. And I need to give the collection ID that I want to run and the Postman API key along with the environment ID, UUID, and the Postman API key. And that's how I'm going to be able to run this one. So I will go back and let me just trigger this one. Awesome. So what I just did is used Jenkins to create a Jenkins pipeline, but we did that with Nguyen. So we have this one created, and this is something that got created because of the Nguyen run. It ran the collection. It went through the request and it created this. But now you would ask me how I get the details that are required. So there was, yeah, we pointed at the Postman API key and collection and environment UUID. So let me show you how I got these in the first place. For the collection UUID, what you can simply do is click on the collection and go over to this info icon. And this is the UUID. So if I just copy this, and that's the one that I put right here. And for the environment, it's a similar thing. If I go select the environment, and if I go on the info icon, I will be able to copy the environment ID. So that's how I get these two. The third one, which is the Postman API key, which you can see very clearly in this video, is something that I'm going to delete after the webinar just to be safe, because we don't want everybody using my Postman API key. But let me show you how I was able to create an API key with Postman. And that's how you can do it as well. So I've actually zoomed in quite a bit, which is why I'm navigating. So if I go over to my profile and go to account settings, and yes, Postman API key. And I've created one specifically for this webinar, which I'm going to delete right after the webinar. But if you click on this, this is how you can generate the API key. So you can use the API key to fetch collections, to fetch environments, and to be able to directly make changes in the collection, and then for them to be reflected when you actually run the pipeline through Nguyen. Great. So this is the second way. Again, just to reiterate, the first way was we used the collection runner, and we had to manually trigger the runner, but it would run in a for loop. Like, let's say it would run in a loop for all of the data objects that we had. So maybe for each service, it would spin up pipelines. That's with the runner. Then we try to integrate this workflow using Nguyen in the Jenkins pipeline. And the third way that I'm going to go ahead with, which should be fairly shorter, is using the Postman monitors. So what I will do is, one is, this is a public workspace, the one here, this Postman Space Camp one. So we're going to be working in my private workspace, which is, oops, which is gone. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just forgot the name to my workspace, which happens if you have too many workspaces and use Postman a lot. Yep. So if I go and click under this monitors tab, right now there is no monitor. So I'll go ahead, create a monitor, and let me call this staging CI/CD. Okay. And we can select the collection. So I'm going to select this collection, and I'm going to select the staging environment. And we can schedule this monitor to run at frequent intervals. So it gives a week timer, hour timer, minute timer. For now, I'm just going to go ahead with the defaults. And in case anything fails, right? So in the collections, we have a test which says that the status code is 200 for each of the API requests that we fired. So if any of these were to fail, then we will get a notification through email on this, like on the email that you mentioned. Otherwise, there are Postman integrations, which you can have with like PagerDuty, Slack, and HipChat. So you can get notifications to Slack if you use those integrations. But the integrations, as far as I know, are not available on the free tier, and they're based on like the tier that you're using. So I'm going to go ahead and create the monitor. And if I wait for it to be run when it's scheduled, which is like weekdays, 3 p.m. or something like that, I will have to wait too long. For the sake of this demo, what I'm going to do is just hit run.
No worries. While we're waiting for it, so you're saying that monitors, I can run it from the Postman app itself, whereas Nguyen, it's like a headless monitor. I can run it from my command line or even up on a server, right?
Yep. Yeah. So Nguyen, you will have the control to be able to run it from like any server, because it's the command line util that's available.
Okay, that's nice that we have a flexibility for our API ops developers to pick and choose. Oh, cool.
Yes.
We got the results now.
And thank you, Boo. Yeah. Just in time. I was wondering when it's going to come. And it's good that it failed, right? Everything is green. So you usually tend to get very doubtful. It's like the watermelon effect, like it's green on the outside, red on the inside kind of thing. So it, yeah, the monitor, I hit run, that's why it ran, but otherwise it's going to be scheduled to run at the interval that I specify, and it's going to run the collection. So this, and this one failed, right? The second one failed. So we, which gives me a chance to actually show you how to debug a monitor. So yeah, the status code that we've got is 400, which is probably, I'm guessing, because we said deploy to staging quiz, and I'm guessing that pipeline already exists. Yes, and that's why that failed. Yeah, that's why this one failed, which is okay. So I will go over to the public workspace documentation again, because that's acting like a helper for me as to what to do next. Yeah, so we covered the collection runner. We covered the command line with Newman, and the two different ways. I didn't go ahead and do the file one, but I used the API instead, because we'll be able to see all the changes that we do in the workspace when we actually fetch them using the API to run with Newman. And this is the command that I use. And we also created a Postman monitor. Though just about the Postman monitor, I want to mention that we did create a Postman monitor for this workflow, but it may not make as much sense to create a monitor for a workflow, because spinning up pipelines is a one-time task, and it's not something that we want to run at equal intervals. So, but the idea is for you to be like, for us to be on the same page about how to use monitors. So in case there is a job, let's say a lot of us are writing contract tests for a particular service, and that's something we want to run daily, maybe every 3 hours, then that's a pretty good use case for a monitor, because it's a scheduled run. The next and the last way to trigger a workflow run, automate the workflow run, is using webhooks, which in the interest of time, I will not go into the depths of, but I have it created already in my personal workspace. So I can just show that to you for a bit. But otherwise, this link and all of the links, right? All of the links that we're sharing throughout the webinar is all available in this documentation. So it'll be really helpful if you could like fork the collection or probably watch the collection. And if you fork the collection, you would be able to make edits to the collection, because it's your own personal copy of it. But if you were to watch the collection, and after the webinar, let's say we're going to add more useful links. For example, whenever the webinar is uploaded on YouTube, we'll be sure to add the link to the YouTube video on the collection. So if you watch the collection, that's like any changes is something that you can get notified of. So yeah, the last part is using webhooks. So I'm going to go to my personal workspace where I have created this webhooks collection. And yeah. Okay. So briefly, I will just go over to trigger webhook. What it does is you can use a webhook to run a certain collection. So this is a webhook that is existing. And if I click on send, it will actually run a collection. So let's say I want to automate the running of this introduction for API Ops professional collection, then I will create a webhook. And the way that you create the webhook again is you need the Postman API to do that, the way that we did it with Newman and you saw. So you need to specify the workspace ID, and you need to be able to say the ID of the collection that you want to run. And that's how you will be, oops, yeah, that's how you'll be able to create the webhook. And once you get the webhook URL, you actually go ahead and trigger the webhook. So I'm not going to go into the depths of it in the interest of time, but the idea was just to be able to show that it's possible to create a webhook URL. So any of the other clients, for example, Slack, or any other client that you can configure a webhook URL to. So let's say there is a Slack command and I say, hey, run this job for me or something like that. And on that command, this webhook runs. So whenever this webhook runs, in an automated fashion, the entire workflow that, like the collection UUID that we mentioned for the webhook, that is going to run. So you can integrate the webhook with any of the tools that you're currently using, and that's how it's useful. I think we're almost at the end. Before we move to Q&A, I just want to cover any additional resources that we want to share with the attendees. So, yep. We've covered how to automate workflows or different environments that are there. Feel free to go ahead, try the collection out in your workspaces. But for additional resources, there are a couple of integrations which you can have a look at. The PagerDuty integration, which is a monitoring integration. So there's one way, the Postman monitor. The Postman monitor sends an email to like my email ID. But if you want PagerDuty, like you're already using PagerDuty and you want that to report whenever something fails, then that integration is possible based on the tier that you're using. And similar with the AWS API gateway integration, it'll help you to deploy the API that you design. And a lot of what we covered during the webinar is actually part of an exploratory video. It walks you through the different ways to run Postman collections. Before we move to the Q&A, I just wanted to actually show how the integrations bit looks. And then again, like this one's not there for the free tier, but then it's there based on the tier that you're using. But just to be able to show, there are integrations for monitoring. So if I search for these integrations as PagerDuty, Splunk, Datadog, Webhooks, Slack, and these are something that you can use if you're on a team plan or enterprise plan or I think I'll stop sharing. Yeah, I'll go back to the presentation and yeah, we're almost closing. So do you want to do a quick recap of all the things that we covered?
Yeah, Meena, that was great. Thanks for showing all of that. Yeah, so just real quickly, we configured an environment within Postman for different servers. Then we created some automated workflows, followed by we integrated within our CI/CD pipeline. So, we use Jenkins for this. And you can use other tools as well, such as, was it Travis? There's also anything that you can even use within a Docker image. Next, we showed some monitors we're using APIs on websites, followed by deploying it. So as Meena showed, you can use the AWS integration to deploy it. And last but not least, we set up some alerts, even for integrations, just so that you can monitor within PagerDuty, Slack, Splunk, or so.
Awesome. So yeah, in terms of resources, if you want to run the collections, Yeah, in terms of resources, if you want to if you're running the collections, if you're stuck with the Jenkins, or if you're stuck with anything at all, we have a very friendly community. So if you have a Postman account already, and if you're not yet on the community forum, we definitely recommend just being on the community forum, asking your questions, and there's definitely going to be someone to help you through it. And we're going to be on the community as well. The exploratory video is something that you can refer to, and the Postman Space Camp page is something that you might want to be on the lookout for, because we're doing such webinars often where we can try out like workflows, design, or previously there was a webinar done by Sean, who was a developer advocate on my team, and Claire, and that was Introduction to Postman for Developers. So you can find all of that on this link. Yep. The Q&A. Okay. So there aren't any open questions, but I think there is one that would be helpful for everybody. Is we covered the runner and Newman and monitors, and we also spoke about the webhook. So would you want to just briefly talk about the use case for each one of them? Because there are 4 ways. So when would you prefer something for a monitor or a runner versus Newman or a webhook?
Yeah. So if I'm just making a one-time call, I will most likely just use the runner, just because I don't need it in the future. I don't need to plug it into any schedule. So for example, how we spun up a server in Jenkins, I'll just use the runner itself, just so it runs the specific endpoints in the collection. And I inserted the data files. And then, so for monitors, the biggest point there is that you can schedule it on that time. It goes as low as 5-minute increments if you want to get the test results or add it to your workflow. So that means it runs a couple hundred times a minute if you set it at 5 minutes, sorry, a couple hundred times a day. But I like to do it as a daily test just to make sure that I can ensure the quality of my APIs as they're behaving to spec. And last but not least, we showed Newman, which is a headless monitor. So you can run it as part of your command line interface. So now it's, as Meena shown, it was pretty easy. It was just Newman run with the associated values added at the end. So she shared a collection link. So she went Newman run and collection link. That way you can run it quickly. And within Newman, you have the option of exporting the collection file locally, but we don't always recommend that just because you're losing that single source of truth because you're having an offline version floating around. So but the whole idea is that you have a couple of options to run your tests or even automate them.
Great. Yeah, I think that sums up everything that we went through throughout the webinar. So just to conclude, 18th August, there is another webinar by Almi and Sean, which is Design and Prototype an API in Postman. And it's especially useful for architects, product managers, and if you're a developer. So make sure you register to that webinar through the Space Camp page. And just before you leave, if we'll share this link on the chat, but if you can spend a minute or so, it's a short form to fill out the survey. So this survey will help us to understand how your experience was with the webinar and if there's any feedback which we can incorporate into future webinars.
Okay, awesome. So Meena, I think we do have a question that's on the open chat. The question is, do we need to configure something on a Git project so that I will execute on Jenkins? Any configurations?
So what I've done for the for this webinar is I have just used the installing Jenkins documentation and run a Jenkins container on a machine. Like you could run it locally, or you can, like if you have it on a remote server somewhere on AWS. That's what I've done. I've just run the Docker container, but you can also run it locally, I think. And that's all part of like installing. That's part of the Jenkins documentation. Oops. Vu, can you help paste the link to the survey in the chat?
Yeah. Okay, I just shared it to the chat.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, there was a lot of exciting stuff today. I definitely learned some different options within the API ops workflows. You know, for example, how you mentioned you use Jenkins over a server. I usually run it locally, and sadly, it's slower for me. So it's good to see your implementation of it running over a server and how it was a better experience. And I just love having options, just because every developer has a different specific workflow. So options are always great.
Yeah, I think the idea of this was just a lot of people on the chat, actually, few of them don't use Jenkins, few of them use other tools, but this is something that's possible with any other tool as long as they have an API which we can use. So,
yeah, and I've seen other folks even use it on, as I mentioned earlier, Azure DevOps or even AWS, as because they're running it from a Docker image. So it's just really convenient to have.
Yep. Cool. I think yeah, I think we've reached time, and feel free to drop off, or I guess we'll end call once it's done, and once you've filled up the survey. And you could always fork the collection and view the documentation and be on the community forum. Reach out to us for any support. Thank you so much. And thank you, Vu.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Meena. Awesome.